Yo, what's good, everyone? It's your boy Hidden Stories Unveiled, back with another story that's gonna make you question everything. This time, we're diving into a showdown of epic proportions. You've got a super rich heiress who decides it's a great idea to drag her cleaner on stage at a fancy gala for a sick prank. But what she didn't count on was a hidden truth. A secret history that was about to get dropped right in front of everybody. The prank wasn't just ruined, it blew up in her face, and the entire crowd went dead silent. You want to know what happened next? Let's break it down. In the pre-dawn quiet of a penthouse, the first light touched a pair of hands. They were not soft hands. They moved with a quiet rhythm, polishing the surface of a marble table until it shone like a black mirror, reflecting a world upside down. These hands belonged to a woman, but here she was only a function, a blur of a gray uniform in a palace of cold white and gold. This was her daily geography, 43 floors above a city whose noise never reached this sanctum, dusting artifacts that cost more than a lifetime of her labor. The penthouse belonged to Serafina Sterling. As the cleaner's cloth passed over a framed photo of Serafina at last year's Hearts Alight Philanthropy Gala, the woman herself swept into the room. Serafina was a storm of silk and purpose, a phone pressed to her ear. No, the orchids must be ice white. I want tears in their eyes, not admiration. Her gaze, sharp and dismissive, swept over the cleaner as if she were a well-placed lamp. And have the staff use the service elevator. I don't want the scent of the street in the foyer. The cleaner, Alara, did not flinch. She had learned stillness was the best armor. She focused on the grain of the wood, the smudge on the glass, the tangible proof of her work. In her bag, tucked between a change of clothes and a half-eaten apple, was a sonogram photo. The grainy image was her secret constellation, a future plotted in a tiny, flickering heartbeat. Every polish, every sweep, was a coin towards that future. Serafina's voice cut the air again, now flavored with performative sorrow. The theme is lifting the unseen. Darling, it's about giving a voice to the voiceless. She said this while stepping over the bucket of water Alara had just placed down, not a flicker of recognition crossing her flawless face. The injustice wasn't in the labor, it was in the erasure. Alara was the unseen, being lifted as a rhetorical theme by the very person who refused to see her. And tonight, at that gala, Serafina would stand before 1,000 flashbulbs and speak of grace, while the woman who buffeted her world to a shine would be miles away, counting every penny, her own heart heavy with a hope that felt dangerously fragile. Later, as Alara was collecting her things from the silent kitchen, Serafina appeared in the doorway. The heiress held a single, thick envelope between two fingers, its paper the color of cream. A smile played on her lips, a curator's smile, the kind reserved for unveiling a new acquisition. Alara, a moment, she said, the name sounding foreign in her mouth. Your dedication hasn't gone unnoticed. Alara froze, her hand tightening around the strap of her worn bag. Serafina never used her name. This was a performance, and she was now an unwilling player on stage. Serafina extended the envelope. My annual gala is tonight. The theme is lifting the unseen. I find it fitting that you should attend. Consider it a token, a chance to see the result of all your hard work. The invitation was heavy, embossed with Serafina's personal crest. It felt less like paper and more like a door, one that shouldn't be opened. Inside, the script was elegant, summoning the guest to an evening of philanthropy and champagne. The guest line simply read, Elara, staff. That single word transformed the gesture. It wasn't an honor. It was a classification. She was being invited not as a person, but as a symbol of the very invisibility Serafina pretended to champion. It's black tie, of course, Serafina added, her eyes drifting over Elara's simple, faded dress. A flicker of something cold passed behind them. Amusement, anticipation. Do come. It would mean so much to me to have you there. The words were sweet, but their taste was metallic. This was not generosity. It was a command wrapped in silk. Elara's mind raced. The gala was a universe away. She had nothing to wear. The thought of standing in that crowd, a great ghost among peacocks, sent a chill through her. But the sonogram in her bag seemed to pulse with possibility. What if? The tiny, foolish voice of hope whispered. What if this was a genuine chance? A connection? A story to tell her child one day about the night she stepped into the light. To refuse would be to insult Serafina, to risk the job she desperately needed. The invitation in her hands was no gift. It was a lever, and Serafina had just placed it under the fragile cornerstone of Elara's entire world. A sly smile suggesting she couldn't wait to see what would give way first. Elara's apartment was the opposite of the penthouse. It lived in a constant, gentle sigh, the hum of a faulty refrigerator, the drip from a kitchen tap she knew by heart. Here, the scent wasn't jasmine and money, but lemon soap and old wood. The gilded invitation lay on her small table like an artifact from another planet, its sheen mocking the peeling laminate beneath it. Her son, Leo, slept fitfully in the next room, his breath a shallow rasp against the quiet. The doctor's words from last week were a fresh bruise. A specialist, different treatments, costs we need to discuss. Each word was a number, and every number was a mountain. The cleaning job was a lifeline, frayed but holding. The thought of losing it, of Serafina's cold displeasure, was a terror that outweighed the dread of the gala itself. This was the calculation of the powerless. Attending wasn't about curiosity or fancy dresses. It was a desperate, cloying hope. Maybe, in that room full of powerful people, there would be a moment, a chance encounter, a kind word to a different employer, a single thread she could pull that might lead to a better job, a safer room for Leo, a medicine not rationed by price. The invitation was a door, and even if it led into a lion's den, she had to believe there might be a way out the other side. She stood before her narrow closet. Inside hung her one defense, a simple, dark blue dress she'd worn to her sister's wedding years ago. It was outdated, the fabric worn soft at the elbows. She held it against herself, seeing not the dress, but the contrast it would create. She would be a shadow among spotlights. The humiliation would be visceral, a hot, silent thing she would have to swallow whole. But then she looked at the photo taped to her mirror. Leo, before the coughs took over his laughter, his smile a beacon. Her hand went to her stomach, to the secret promise growing there. This was the true currency of her life, not money, but futures. One child needed a present she could barely afford. The other needed a future she was determined to build. The gala was a gamble with stakes she couldn't articulate. She was betting her last shred of dignity against the faint, desperate hope of a miracle. She would go. She would smile. She would be the unseen, made visible on Serafina's cruel terms. All for the chance, however faint, however foolish, that from that visibility something better might grow. The dress went into her bag, a flag of surrender to a battle she hadn't chosen, but knew she had to fight. The sterling grand ballroom was a cathedral of light and sound, a universe away from the service entrance where Alara had been directed. Stepping inside was a physical assault. Chandeliers, vast constellations of crystal, rained down a light so sharp it felt like it could cut. The air itself was different, thick with perfume, ambition, and the cold, sweet scent of orchids. A sea of silk, tuxedos, and diamonds shifted and glittered, their laughter a high, melodic currency she didn't possess. Alara's simple blue dress, which had felt dignified in her dim apartment, now screamed its age and poverty. It was a single note of muted cloth in a symphony of extravagance. She felt the glances before she saw them, brief, flickering looks that scanned her from head to toe, categorized her as other, and dismissed her. A waiter with a tray of champagne flutes paused, his eyes widening slightly before he schooled his features into professional blankness. She was a stain on the perfect canvas. Then Serafina found her. The heiress was a vision in ice white, a diamond waterfall at her throat catching every spark of light. Alara, you came! Her voice was a carrying, delighted chirp, turning heads. She floated forward, a predator in silk, and clasped Alara's cold hand. The touch was brief, clinical. Everyone, Serafina announced to a cluster of guests, her smile radiant. This is Alara. She keeps my world shining. I simply insisted she join us tonight. After all, how can we lift up the unseen if we don't first invite them to see? The words were a velvet cage. Alara was being presented as Exhibit A, the unseen. The guests offered tight, bemused smiles, their eyes sharp with curiosity and a faint, unspoken derision. Serafina looped an arm through Alara's, a gesture that felt less like companionship and more like possession. She began a slow parade through the crowd, a museum curator showcasing a peculiar, rustic artifact. And over here, Alara is the ice sculpture. Imported glacier water, of course. Quite a contrast to your mop bucket, isn't it? Serafina's tone was light, playful. A titter rippled through her entourage. Each step was a trial. Alara's cheeks burned. The polished marble floor mirrored her isolation back at her, a small, dark figure surrounded by giants. She was not a guest. She was a prop in Serafina's philanthropic theater, a living testament to the heiress's manufactured benevolence. The sensory overload narrowed to a single, humiliating focus. The pressure of Serafina's hand on her arm, steering her deeper into the glittering labyrinth, away from any exit. The warmth of the smile Serafina bestowed upon her was a lie, and the cold truth beneath it was settling into Alara's bones. She was not here to be lifted up. She was here to be measured for a fall. The Colosseum gates had sealed shut behind her, and the crowd's murmur was the sound of anticipation. The gentle clinking of a spoon against crystal hushed the ballroom. All eyes turned to the stage, where Serafina stood bathed in a spotlight, a portrait of elegant compassion. A large screen behind her displayed the gala's motto, "Lifting the Unseen." She leaned into the microphone, her voice a warm, confiding ripple. "Thank you, everyone. tonight fills my heart. But true philanthropy isn't just about writing checks. It's about recognition. It's about bringing the essential, yet overlooked, into the light. Alara stood frozen by a potted orchid, a silent prayer in her chest that this would end, that she could melt into the wallpaper. Serafina's gaze, sharp as a pin, found her in the crowd. A smile, too white, too bright, stretched across her face. That's why tonight I've created a special, impromptu award, the Heart of Service Award, for someone whose dedication is so quiet we might forget it exists. Polite, curious applause filled the room. Guests followed Serafina's gaze, their attention finally settling on Alara with dawning understanding. A path seemed to clear between them and the stage. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird. This was it. The hidden intent was rising to the surface, but its shape was still unclear. A desperate, foolish hope sparked. What if she was wrong? What if this was real? Alara, darling, come up here. Serafina beckoned, her tone sugary. Don't be shy. Every step toward the stage was a walk through thickening dread. The eyes of the city's elite were physical weights upon her. The blinding spotlight swallowed her as she reached Serafina, who pulled her close with a grip that was anything but affectionate. Isn't she remarkable? Serafina cooed to the audience. Day in, day out, ensuring my home is a sanctuary. But a sanctuary for whom? The question hung, a subtle shift in the air. The warmth began to cool. You see, Serafina continued, her voice dropping to a dramatic, confidential tone. True character isn't shown in the ballroom. It's shown in the quiet, private moments when one thinks no one is watching. A sickening chill shot down Alara's spine. The screen behind them flickered to life. It was no longer the logo. It was security footage, grainy, black and white, but unmistakably from Serafina's penthouse. There was Alara in her uniform, alone in the kitchen from just 3 days prior. The footage was silent, but her actions were clear. She was polishing a silver tray. She paused, looked around, and then lifted a single, leftover strawberry from a covered dessert plate. She ate it. Then, with a look of guilt, she quickly wiped the plate clean. It was a moment of human weakness, a tiny theft of a piece of fruit worth less than $1, born from a long day and an empty stomach. The ballroom's silence became absolute, then fractured into a wave of shocked murmurs and stifled giggles. The spotlight on Alara was no longer illumination. It was an interrogation lamp. Serafina's hand was still on her shoulder, a cruel anchor. The heiress's face was a masterpiece of pained disappointment. The Heart of Service Award, she said, the sugar now entirely gone from her voice, replaced by a cold, clear frost, is about trust. And it seems even in our most sacred spaces, trust can be nibbled away. The trap had sprung. The award was the bait. The stage was the cage. And Alara was now the helpless creature inside, exposed not as a hero, but as a thief. The muffled laughter was a swarm of bees against Alara's skin. On the giant screen, her grainy, silent self still held the phantom strawberry, a monument to her supposed crime. Serafina let the image hang, savoring the ruin, before turning back to the microphone. Her expression had shifted from false warmth to a condescending, theatrical sorrow. My friends, she sighed, the sound echoing in the hush. This is the hard, unvarnished truth of philanthropy. We open our homes, our hearts, and sometimes our refrigerators. A wave of louder, more assured laughter rippled through the crowd. The initial shock had passed, replaced by the comfortable amusement of the powerful watching a minor tragedy unfold. This was the evening's unexpected entertainment. This, Serafina said, gesturing to a statue. Still Alara? Is Alara? She cleans my home 3 times a week. She has a son, I'm told, a sickly one. The bills, as you can imagine, must be quite a burden. She spoke about Alara's life as if reading from a clinical, pitying report. Each word was a scalpel, carefully peeling back layers of privacy for the audience's inspection. A small apartment across the river. The kind of place where, I suppose, a fresh strawberry might feel like a luxury. Alara could not move. The spotlight was a physical heat, boiling the tears she refused to shed. She saw the faces below not as individuals, but as a blur of gleaming teeth and glittering jewelry, all turned upward in a grotesque unity of judgment. Her simple blue dress felt like a prisoner's sackcloth. The secret of her pregnancy, her most fragile hope, felt horrifyingly exposed, even though Serafina didn't know it. It was as if her entire struggle, the medicine for Leo, the savings for the baby, the sheer exhausting grind of survival, had been distilled into this one humiliating joke. The cleaner who stole a berry. So, this Heart of Service award, Serafina announced, reaching for a small, absurdly wrapped gift box on the podium. It's not a check. It's not a trophy. She opened the box with a flourish. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a single, perfect gold-plated strawberry on a chain. It was a mockery made tangible. It's a reminder of the small temptations that can betray great trust, and a reminder to all of us to be generous with our leftovers. She held the necklace up. The ballroom erupted, not in applause, but in open, rolling laughter and clapping. The cruel punchline had landed perfectly. The wealthy guests, absolved of any guilt by Serafina's performance, could now enjoy the schadenfreude. They weren't laughing at theft. They were laughing at the sheer, pathetic scale of it. The gap between their world and hers was so vast. Her crime was adorable, quaint. Serafina turned, the necklace dangling from her fingers, and made a show of offering it to Alara. Her eyes held a victorious, icy gleam. This was the true purpose of the invitation, not to lift up, but to pin down, to make the invisible visible, only to frame her as a cautionary tale, a living prop to prove Serafina's own magnanimous superiority. In that suspended moment, Alara heard nothing but the laughter. It filled the grand ballroom. It filled her head. It seeped into the very core of her, threatening to extinguish the last flickering embers of her hope. She was not a person on that stage. She was the punchline. The laughter seemed to solidify in the air, a wall Alara had to break through to breathe. She took a shuddering step back from Serafina, from the glinting, mocking strawberry pendant. The urge to run was a primal scream in her veins, to vanish into the dark, to escape the spotlight's merciless dissection. She turned, her vision blurred, focusing only on the distant, merciful gloom at the edge of the stage. A voice cut through the noise. Stop! It was not loud. It did not shout. It was a low, calm blade of sound, worn smooth by age and authority. It did not ask. It commanded, and the room, so attuned to the subtle currencies of power, obeyed instantly. The laughter choked off mid-guffaw, leaving a ringing, hollow silence. All eyes tore away from Elara's humiliation and swung toward table 1, front and center. There, rising to his feet, was Mr. Alistair Vance. He was a man whose presence was usually a quiet rumble in the foundation of a room, felt more than heard. Older, with a bearing of unassailable dignity, he was a legend in circles that considered Serafina's family mere newcomers. His philanthropy was foundational, building hospitals and libraries that bore his name with quiet grace, never his face. He did not look at the crowd. His gaze, steady and grave, was fixed on the stage, on Serafina. "That is quite enough," he said, each word measured and clear, dropping into the silence like stones into a still pond. A ripple of pure shock passed through the audience, followed by a feverish, silent curiosity. This was not in the program. Serafina stood frozen, the smirk wiped from her face, replaced by a stunned confusion that bordered on panic. Her perfect event, her narrative of controlled cruelty, had just been hijacked. The power, which had flowed so effortlessly from her minutes before, was now draining away, pulled toward the old man's unwavering stance. "You speak of trust, Miss Sterling," Vance continued, his voice carrying without effort. "You orchestrate a spectacle of judgment." He did not glance at the frozen security footage, dismissing it with a slight, weary turn of his head. But true character is not revealed in the persecution of the vulnerable for amusement. It is revealed in the choice to persecute at all. The air crackled. This was no longer about a stolen strawberry. This was about something far deeper. A line of decency that had been publicly crossed, and a man of genuine influence had just stepped in to name it. Serafina floundered, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The obstacle was no longer Elara's shame. It was Serafina's sudden, terrifying loss of control. And in the center of it all, Elara stood trapped between two forces, the receding tide of cruelty and the gathering, unknown storm of an intervention she could not comprehend. For the first time that night, she was not the sole focus, and in that shift, a single, fragile question ignited in the wreckage of her spirit. Why? Alistair Vance did not wait for a reply. He moved from his table with a slow, deliberate pace, the crowd parting before him like a sea. His focus bypassed a spluttering Serafina entirely. He stopped at the base of the stage, his eyes lifting not to the heiress in her spotlight, but to the woman trembling beside her. His gaze was not one of pity, but of profound, searching respect. "Young woman," he said, his voice softening only for her, "what is your name? Your full name?" The question hung in the breathless quiet. Elara, her voice a fractured whisper from the dryness in her throat, managed to speak. Elara Thorne. The name, spoken aloud in that room for the first time, seemed to ignite a memory in the older man. His eyes closed for a brief, pained moment. When they opened, they glistened with a sorrow that felt decades deep. "Thorne," he repeated, the word a heavy sigh. He turned then, not to Serafina, but to address the entire captive ballroom, his voice reclaiming its resonant power. "There is an injustice in this room tonight," he began, far older and fouler than a piece of fruit. He pointed a steady finger at the gala's grand banner, at the sterling name woven into its fabric. You all know that name. You celebrate its wealth. But do you know its foundation? His gaze swung to Serafina, who had gone pale. The first Sterling Corporation, Sterling and Thorne Engineering, was not built by a single man. It was built by two, Silas Sterling and his partner, Alistair Thorne. A collective gasp, sharp and real, cut the air. Alara's hand flew to her mouth. Thorne, her grandfather's name, a man who had died in the same modest apartment she now lived in, speaking of betrayal only in bitter, cryptic fragments she'd been too young to understand. Silas Sterling, Vance continued, the history rolling out like an indictment, forged documents after his partner's death. He erased Alistair Thorne's ownership, stole his shares, and rewrote history to claim sole genius. The Thornes were pushed into obscurity and poverty, while the Sterlings built an empire on the theft. He turned back to Alara, his expression one of immense apology. Your family's struggle was not an accident of fate, my dear. It was the deliberate, generational consequence of a crime. The wealth in this room, the very dress Serafina wears, was purchased with the life that should have been yours. The revelation was a seismic shock, restructuring the entire night. Alara was no longer a humble cleaner. She was a living ghost of a stolen legacy. The laughter that had targeted her moments before now curdled into a sickened, shameful silence. Every eye upon her was different now, seeing not a thief, but a rightful heir standing in rags amidst her own plundered inheritance. Serafina's cruel prank had not exposed a cleaner's weakness. It had exposed her own family's original sin. The silence that followed was thick, electric, and damning. The air itself seemed to reorient, the moral gravity of the room shifting with a tangible, sickening lurch. Where moments before there had been pointed fingers and mocking smiles aimed at Alara, now there were only wide, stunned eyes and hands covering gaping mouths. The ghost of their own laughter haunted them, a shameful echo in their ears. Every gaze that had once stripped Alara of her dignity now turned toward Serafina. But the contempt was no longer casual or amused. It was cold, hard, and unforgiving. They saw her now not as a witty hostess, but as the latest inheritor of a poisoned legacy, a woman who had just paraded the true victim of her family's theft for sport. Her ice-white dress no longer looked elegant. It looked like a hollow costume. The diamond necklace was no longer a symbol of wealth, but of plunder. Alistair Vance let the truth settle, a judge allowing a verdict to be absorbed. Then he spoke again, his words not for Serafina, but as a decree for the room to witness. This ends tonight. My foundation will immediately retain the foremost legal firm in the city. We will file suit to unwind the historical fraud, to audit the Sterling holdings, and to restore to Miss Alara Thorne what is rightfully hers, her grandfather's share, with all its accrued value and interest. A murmur, this time of odd assent, rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded. The same powerful figures who had laughed now sought to align themselves with this new, stunning narrative of justice. Their attention settled back on Alara. Her simple dress was no longer a mark of poverty, but a symbol of resilience. Her quiet dignity was no longer invisible. It was regal. She stood on the stage, not as a punchline, but as a rightful claimant suddenly visible in her true light. The humiliation had not just been reversed, It had been atomized and flung back at its source with overwhelming force. Serafina stood utterly alone in the spotlight she had commanded, now a blinding interrogation lamp exposing her family's crime and her own cruel complicity, as the sealed judgment of her entire world closed in around her. Backstage, away from the glaring lights and the murmuring crowd, the world was reduced to the sound of Alera's shaky breath. Mr. Vance stood before her, his imposing presence softened into a grandfatherly gentleness. He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Your grandfather," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble, "was the finest man I ever knew. His honor was his currency. They could steal his money, but they could never touch that. And I see it alive in you." The words were a balm, healing a deeper wound than the night's humiliation. This wasn't about wealth. It was about a story, wrong for a generation, finally being set right. It was the restoration of a name. Alara felt the crushing weight of invisibility lift, replaced by a fragile, dawning sense of wholeness. Through a gap in the curtains, the final image presented itself. On the now empty stage, surrounded by the decaying splendor of orchids and abandoned champagne flutes, stood Serafina. The spotlight was still on, a single, lonely circle of light holding her prisoner. All her guests, her power, her performance had evaporated, leaving only the echoing silence of her own disgrace. The gilded cage she had built to mock another now held only her, its bars forged from the consequences of a legacy built on theft and a character built on cruelty. The true worth had been judged, and it had nothing to do with a bank balance.